All right. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, friends of Ideas Malaysia. Ideas is committed to provide a working environment for all employees that is free from sexual, racial, political, and other types of harassments. We do not give any tolerance for any sexual exploitation, and everyone here in this room is free to discuss without feeling endangered. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome each and every one of you to the Forum of ASEAN Prosperity Initiative Public Forum. And we'll be discussing on the ASEAN Economic Outlook in 2022, analyzing issues, challenges, and key drivers. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go further into the forum today, allow me just to also welcome to all of the speakers, which I will introduce later on. But more interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, the regional forum that we were having today is in conjunction with the launch of ASEAN Prosperity Initiative website, which can be found at aseanprosperity.org. And secondly, it will also be the launching of the ASEAN Integration Report 2021. And the report assembles various speakers and scholars across Southeast Asian nations to contribute their thoughts and ideas on what is it to be expected in 2022 and ahead. And before I go further into explaining the report and the launches, allow me just to go through to explain a little bit what is the API in general. The ASEAN Prosperity Initiative, API, is a research and advocacy-based project which seeks to highlight the key opportunities and challenges presented by the ASEAN economy for the period up to 2025. The API is one of the flagship projects of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas, and is intended to serve as a focal reference for development and economic-related issues in relation to Southeast Asia. The project is jointly funded by the Frederick Naumann Foundation for Democracy. We thank our funders and all interested partners, scholars, and contributors who have made this project a success throughout. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to call upon Tricia Yeo, the CEO of Ideas Malaysia, to deliver her opening remarks. Over to you, Tricia.
Hi, very good morning to everyone, to the panelists who have agreed to join us this morning. So good morning to Dr. Arianto Patunru from the ANU, Professor Dr. Kriengsak, Chareonwongsak. We've met many years ago. We haven't had the chance to meet in recent times from the Nation Building Institute in Thailand. And of course, Jukhee Hong, our friend, an executive director at the CARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy organization in Malaysia. Thank you for agreeing to be here this morning. Today, we are very pleased to launch a couple of different things. So of course, the forum for today is on ASEAN Economic Outlook in 2022, analyzing issues, challenges, and key drivers. But apart from this, talking about what we're going to foresee in the coming year after 2 years of a pandemic and rather haphazard lockdowns that were administered across the region. What are we expecting next in the coming year? Today we're actually launching two things. So I believe my colleagues can put the link at the chat for everyone else's privilege. We are launching our API website, the ASEAN Prosperity Initiative website, as well as our ASEAN Prosperity Initiative Integration Report 2021. So every year we compile reports of different papers and articles of the most relevant topics of the year. And this year is no different as well. So this entire project is an ongoing one that Ideas, which is a think tank based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, continues to do on an annual basis. And so if you look at the website, you'll see reports and infographics and videos and podcasts and lots of material on ASEAN over the last few years already. And this project is supported by Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, and we are very thankful for that support. This year in particular, we looked at 4 different areas from authors across the region. So one thing that we are very proud about in this project is that it's an opportunity to bring authors and scholars from across the region together to discuss topics that are most urgent. COVID-19, of course, has laid bare the inequities which plague many of the ASEAN societies. And the first thing that hit us when the pandemic came about last year was the area of food insecurity. So we have colleagues from the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, CHIPS, Philippa Ann, Amanta, and Nisrina Nuraini Nafisa, who talk about the importance of food security, but also arguing that greater regional integration is the key to strengthening regional food security. We also have our speaker here, Jukhee Hong, who was also a contributor to the report, who talked about the fact that ASEAN must increasingly confront the region's acute vulnerability to climate change, and refers to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And the pandemic has presented a unique opportunity for a fundamental reset. Of course, the other thing that we have been made more aware of as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we know that there is also rapid growth and reliance of increasing demand for electricity. We have a former minister, Yobi Yin, who authored one of the particular chapters, who talks about how a more integrated electricity system within ASEAN should be realized. So she talks a lot about the ASEAN Power Grid, the APG. And at the moment, the progress is rather slow without political resolve on the part of the various member states. And last but not least, our IDEAS Senior Fellow, Dr. Jayan Menon, who is also from ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. He talks about the potentially inclusive or inequality offsetting effects that 4IR technologies, or rather the whole 4th industrial revolution and digitalization, can bring to ASEAN. So I do look forward to this report being launched. Please check out the website once the forum is over, where the team will be uploading this on the website. And I look forward to listening the viewpoints from our 3 esteemed speakers as to what sort of challenges lay ahead for the region. We've gone through, as I said earlier, a very rough and turbulent 2 years, and what the countries will plan to do both individually as well as collectively in the region to spur ourselves beyond, we can't even say post-pandemic anymore, because we're still quite rather in the middle of the pandemic with new variants of concern coming up. So, perhaps if I had one question to pose to the panelists, and this is getting a little bit ahead of myself, would be to wonder what prospects for growth and stability there remain for the countries in the region, bearing in mind the potentially long-term effects of the pandemic, which also laid bare a lot of the structural inefficiencies, economically, security-wise, and whether moving forward, the region will be prepared to face these shocks. And should there be any other sort of crisis in the future, what happens to the resilience, the economic and security resilience of the region moving forward? So with those big questions in mind, I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you once again for agreeing to participate. And I look forward in the future to doing this in person so that we can actually, shake your hands and thank you in person. With that, thank you very much. I pass the time back to Dr. Zokhri.
Thank you, Tricia. Tricia has built up the mood of the discussion today in setting the angle as what should be the direction of ASEAN in 2022. And I think this is very timely for us to discuss all this because for the past 2 years, ladies and gentlemen, the region has been hit by the pandemic, which severely impact and adversely affecting all sorts of areas within the region. And we can say that the region now is in the road to recovery. But the question remains, what would be the formula or the mechanisms or the tactics for us to recover as a region, as a nation, and as the whole world? But in the context of the discussion today, we'll be looking at the mechanics of the region for us to recover from all sorts of relevant sectors. And also interesting enough, from the external factor, we also have look at the emergence of multilateral partnerships that includes RCEP, the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, as well as the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. So again, with the local drivers as well, perhaps an external drivers that we have, do we see that ASEAN is actually in the process of recovery? What could be the challenges? What solutions could be offered to overcome these challenges if these challenges ever exist? And will the encouraging of ASEAN greater integration, the ASEAN greater market integration can guarantee a smooth process of economic recovery and development in the region? So these are, in fact, some of the questions that we will try to tangle and decipher throughout the forum. And of course, the forum is hand in hand to be read with the report. However, in this forum today, we have managed to gather all of the esteemed panelists across the region to talk about their own expertise and experience, as well as the work that they have done in the region when it comes to economic recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to welcome the first speaker of the API Regional Forum. Please welcome Dr. Arianto Patunru. Dr. Patunru is a fellow at the Arndt-Corden Department of Economics, Australian National University, particularly in the Indonesia project. So Dr. Patunru, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Idris. It's my pleasure to be here in this very important forum. So thank you for having me, for inviting me, and also thank to Dr. Yeo for the invitation, and very good to see my fellow panelists, and also welcome other attendants and participants. So let me try to share my screen so I can start. Let me see. Can you see Dr. Idris? Okay, good. So again, also congratulations for the launching of the report. I'm looking forward to reading the report. I'm sure it's going to be very important and timely, actually, for the background that you already mentioned, and Dr. Tricia Yeo also discussed in the beginning. So in this short presentation, I will highlight some recent developments, and also focused more on the global value chains, if I may, and also mention some other challenges that we might see in the coming future. I'm not gonna give any forecast because I'm not particularly good in forecasting. So, but I will try to at least mention some factors that I think will stay with us, or even are still unfolding in the coming future, even the short distant future, next year and beyond. So let me start. Okay, of course, because we are still in the COVID situation, it's still here with us. I'll start with this summary from yesterday. I think most of you are now very familiar with these charts. Also, my apologies to other colleagues from other ASEAN countries that are not reported here in this graph. But you can see that some of us in ASEAN here are still really struggling facing the COVID. My country, for example, if you see Indonesia, there has highest number of confirmed COVID-19 deaths, and you can see probably everyone remember that around July, Indonesia in particular was struggling with the Delta variant, and some other countries also in the region at different time. And this is when we look at the linear statistics. But if we see from log statistics, we can also see the trend, and it's quite worsening in the case of Singapore, for example, Vietnam and Thailand. So the Delta, of course, it started in the region. It started with probably in Thailand in May, and then we have Vietnam around June and July. So around the same time as Indonesia, if you remember the first slide, and then we have Singapore. Maybe August, September, and you can see the hiking. The hike there is quite sharp, and this is the case of Vietnam, and that's Thailand. And of course, after some struggling, but also good policies, it started to flatten at the end, but then Omicron came, right? So we, as Tricia mentioned in the beginning, we might still have to struggle next year. So we really need to take this into account, how to actually live with the pandemic, how to actually prepare for the next variants, and so forth. Now to the economy. If we plot the economic growth, you can see that small V shape there, right? And then at the end, it's flipped. So that is the reverse V shape that actually signify or telling us about the recovery, economic recovery. But look at the V shape there. It shows that some of us, well, most of us actually in the region, were having contraction in the first year of the pandemic. But if we compare this with the other crisis that we experienced, and that was the Asian financial crisis, this V is small v. Okay, in 97, 98, the V shape is much bigger, much deeper. My country, for example, Indonesia, actually was contracted by 13%. So we are lucky that we managed to have only a small contraction, if you like, and then we recover here. This flip side actually also reflect the what economists call base effect. That means because we had sharp contraction, when we recover, it's quite high also. So this later part of the lines shows that we are getting towards the normalcy, hopefully, but of course we need to be vigilant still due to Omicron and possibly other variants. Okay, I'm going to be quick on these other indicators. So if you look at the inflation, for example, despite the fact that now everyone is discussing about the possible very high inflation coming out from Biden administration's policies in the US, and also some in the European countries, I think for us in the region, the inflation are still quite manageable. You can see, of course, some of them are quite volatile. For example, Vietnam, and also Thailand and Malaysia are showing a similar pattern. But I think on average, they are quite controlled. Of course, this is not to say we have to we still have to be vigilant of of other possibilities. Also, now that we are looking at possible imported inflation, for example, and then another type of inflation that might come from this COP26 agreement, where many countries and now private sectors also are trying to move towards renewables that might create some shocks in the inflation, although maybe it's a short term. Okay, and in terms of policy interest rate, we can also see there are room for maneuvering when dealing with the inflation. Of course, there are some countries that are dealing with possible zero lower bound, like Singapore here, and also the Philippines. But for others, I think there are room for cutting interest rate if needed. But if the inflation is the concern, of course, the possible solution is way upward, so the hike of interest rate. But so far, we see that they are quite stable. And exchange rate also, it's not so volatile compared to, for example, what our countries experienced in the Asian financial crisis. So are the equity markets or stock market indexes. Okay, but let me now focus to some of the relevant indicators that are related to what I'm going to stress in the later half of this presentation, that is the global supply chain. So if you look at these selected indicators, I borrow from Hal Hill and Jaiman's new paper. So you can see that per capita GDP are quite there is quite variation in the region. Of course, if we compare these four countries, we have a lower income, upper income, and some in the middle, like Indonesia and Thailand. And we see, again, this has been shown in the previous slide in terms of charts. We can see that these four countries are contracted quite well. Some of them are quite severe, like the Philippines, minus 9.6 in 2020. But in terms of per capita income, again, we can see some variation. But these are the interesting, this last four rows are relevant for the discussion on global value chains. For example, if you look at the trade over GDP ratio, we can see that country like Indonesia, for example, is not as exposed to international market like other countries. For example, Thailand, 109, and Malaysia, 123% of GDP. And that was also the reason why Indonesia during the global financial crisis was not very affected. But of course, that is not the objective of economic development, to limit their trade, their export and import, for the reasons that I will explain later. So basically, there is some indication that even Indonesia, that has very low exposure to trade, they need or they want to go further than that, but at the same time they want to try to minimize or to mitigate potential adverse shocks from external situation like global value chain disruption. Right, we can see other indicators like weighted average tariff has been very low, but of course tariff is not the only trade policy for protectionism, but we also have actually increasing number of non-tariff measures that we need to deal with in the coming future. And this last one here is the global production network products. Again, we can see variations. Countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, they are more integrated into the global production network compared to Indonesia and Thailand, for example. And that also a reflection of the fundamental or the endowment in the respective economy. Just some about the emerging and unfolding issues. Before Omicron, there has been discussion about endemicization, right? How we deal with this pandemic, each and for individual countries, how to actually live with them, considering that COVID might stay with us for very long time. So how to actually increase the health protocols and all that, but while at the same time accepting the fact that we're going to live with this virus for a long time, just like flu pandemic 100 years ago. But then, while many countries are trying to live with these new normals, and then we are hit by Omicron. So there has been some, slowing down on the thought of endemicization, because now every country are struggling again with this new variant Omicron, and not all of about this Omicron people know about, the aspects, the lethality and things like that. So we are still learning. And then the second issue is about imported inflation. I have touched on this a bit in the beginning, and also the tapering off. There has been some worry about a replication of taper tantrum in 2013. We had this taper tantrum when so much capital flying out from the region, and Indonesia was one of the countries that particularly struggle with this. But I don't think this is going to be, there is going to be a same situation, because currently the fundamentals in each countries in the region are much better than what we had in 2013. And then the next one is the disrupted supply chain, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to focus on that just a little bit. So if we look at the background of the integrating regions, we can see actually that our region is really big in trade integration in terms of intra-regional trade shares, right? If we compare Asia, Eastern EU, and also North America, we can see that it's growing, the network trade is growing, but also we can see that North America, the intra-regional trade shares in North America is going down. In EU, it's stable, around 60%, but in Asia, it's actually increasing. That means Asia production network is increasing at the cost, maybe at the cost of what happens in North America, given this trade wars, Trump, and so forth. But of course, that means opportunity, right? Another difference between the production network in our region and the one in Europe. In Europe is the pattern. The pattern here in Asia is more like network rather than hub and spoke, and that means there is no single hegemon, very strong dominant center. Like, for example, in Europe, it's Germany, but in the ASEAN, it used to be China, but the role of China has decreased, while there are many other centers are growing. So that means we're resembling more of the network pattern. And again, that means opportunity for collaboration in terms of, as Zokhri mentioned, RCEP and CPTPP. And even though there is big integration in the region, there are variations between countries. Again, countries like Indonesia, for example, is still small in terms of their involvement in the global production network. Compared to Malaysia, for example, Malaysia has only 50% of domestic value added. That means half of their manufacturing export actually are collaborating with other countries, or in other words, they are more integrated into production network in the region compared to countries like Indonesia, for example. It is interesting. I put Australia here just for comparison because Indonesia and Australia are two countries that really the dependence on resource economy, and that means their manufacturing it's not as much, and that also means that integration with a global value chain is less than other countries. Okay. This is the COVID disruptive global value chains per compare, because there has been a discussion I've heard about the possibility of renationalize. That means if you have production subsidiaries or production chains in other countries, because of this COVID, you see the contraction and you want to take back your production chains back to the country. So that's renationalization. This new paper from Bonadio and friends show that that is not good idea, right? So this here, trade, that means the contraction of GDP due to trade. And this here is renationalization. That means there's simulation. If you take back your production chain from other countries back to your countries, so renationalization. In the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss other columns, but you can just compare this trade and renationalization. You can see most of them actually showing that in most of the countries show that actually if you renationalize, the drop in GDP is bigger than the drop in the GDP in the status quo. That means if there is no renationalization, GVC as the existing ones today, right? I can go back to this slide later on in the discussion time if you like. But also another important issue, important information from this table is that, of course, renationalization, the effect is really related to the severity of lockdown and also the percentage of jobs that can be done from home, so working from home, right? And there is variation there, and the lockdown is also there. The variation, the stringency, we have seen India, for example, at one point has 100% lockdown severity, but then the domestic, because the channel here is labor supply, so their labor cannot go to work. That means the domestic shock is quite big. There's 63%, and if they do renationalization, it's even bigger shock because of this. Okay, so now given the opportunities and also how we deal with COVID, I think it's a very good opportunity to actually make use of this current trade agreement, RCEP and CPTPP. Both of them are actually resembling DTA in the sense of deep trade agreement as opposed to just preferential trade agreement. PTI is very prone to trade a diversion as opposed to trade creation, but DTA, many studies have shown that it can actually benefit the members because it doesn't just deal with trade, but it also deals with investment, intellectual property rights, and so forth, right? So that's why we see comprehensive trade agreements. So many of them are using this. Okay. Of course, there are criticism like, is it deep enough? There are criticism about RCEP. People said that it is shallow, but I think it's good to start small, because otherwise the economic and political concession will be big, like CPTPP, for example, but RCEP actually can grow gradually. Another issue is this a China's dominance? I don't think so. Some people said that RCEP is dominated by China. Well, people should remember RCEP is initiated by ASEAN, right? Indonesia took leadership also, and other countries follow, but it's not China per se. And then in terms of CPTPP, I think there is a lost opportunity for US because they pull out from TPP. And the fact that now China has officially expressed their intention to join the CPTPP is a good thing, because as what happened when they joined WTO, actually they did a lot of concession for their domestic reform, which is good for the world economy. And we can see that after joining WTO, actually the Chinese economy skyrocketed. And now that they wanted to join CPTPP, I think the members should embrace this. Okay, there is issue about trade wars. It's going to be more nuanced, because in the era of global value chains, of course, the effect of tariffs will be amplified. I'm not going to spend too much here, but I think it's important to focus on building resilience in this time of COVID, rather than focusing just on robustness. Okay, and this is there's a very good new book by Marcus Brunner-Meyer from Princeton on how to build resilient community, resilient society, rather than just robust. If you think about robustness, is actually adding strength, so you cannot bend, but resilience actually allows you to bend, but not being broken, like a high sky tower, for example, or pine trees. Very agile, very flexible. So the implication is that for management is probably not the time now to do just in time anymore, but we move towards the new paradigm, just in case. So you might want to consider a second source, third source for your inputs. There might be some adjustment in the cost, but it's better than just rely on one source or robustness. Right? So that's all. Sorry if I took too much time, Dr. Zokhri, Idris. So I'm gonna stop here and happy to engage in discussion in the Q&A session. Thank you very much. I will stop share my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Patunru. You have put the questions of debate for us to ponder upon, not only within this forum, but also onto the next year, whether we should network or not, whether we should focus on reach nationalizations or not. And I think you've made a really good point in setting up the philosophical directions of ASEAN integrations for 2022 and ahead. Thank you. Now let's move to the second speaker. Our second speaker is Professor Kriengsak, Chareonwongsak. He is the president of the Institute for Future Studies for Development, as well as the chairman of the Nation Building Institute in Thailand. Professor, over to you.
Dr. Tricia Yo, CEO of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, Malaysia. Dr. Zokhri Idris, moderator of this session. I'm delighted to be invited to be with you in this very interesting conference, ASEAN Prosperity Initiatives Public Forum. And my topic that you have assigned me is ASEAN Economic Outlook in 2022. Thank you for the invitation. Let me paint a very quick picture of the ASEAN Economic Outlook 2022, major issues, challenges, and key drivers. As a way of introduction, we can see in the world in the midst of COVID for the last almost 2 years, moving towards overcoming COVID with great difficulties. We have seen the spread of COVID, the various kind of transmittable variants, including Omicron at this present time. Every continent has been affected, let alone Asia. But the good news is that after having a huge number of testing capability, vaccination and treatment and preparedness, the rise of cases of infection has been decreasing. Of course, Omicron and others kind of variants have hit back at Europe stronger than other continents, and that would not spare Asia eventually. In Asia, which is a major continent of the world, that has a huge number of population, we need to look at a very major block that is very important called ASEAN, which we could include some neighbor like Timor Leste, which is also very nearby neighbors. We already have 13.8 million people infected, and we have close to 300,000 people who have died due to COVID. Indonesia is the center of the new kind of spreading of COVID and infection, and huge number of people have died. Malaysia also is at the increasing rate of people being affected. I don't think COVID will disappear. We have to learn to live with it. Omicron is a testimony to the variant that is coming out in a new form that we need to reckon with. And there will be many more other variants, I believe, that we have to deal with. Therefore, we need to look at an economic outlook in the light of COVID pandemic that will not go away quickly. Of course, the strength and problem that come from COVID will have to slow down eventually, but we have to live with it and treat it as if we have to coexist with COVID. We need to look at the issues of how to handle them by treating the symptoms and also the cause of it. Vaccination with the third dose, booster, the fourth dose, the repetitive new doses of vaccination may be needed. Today, we have seen many countries in ASEAN like Singapore who have come face to face with Omicron before any other ASEAN countries. And if we don't handle it well, because we are so connected, eventually, somehow it will slip in to all our borders. And ASEAN will be affected by COVID, especially Omicron and other kinds that may be the offsprings of the future COVID pandemic viruses. Therefore, in the midst of this introduction of COVID crisis, the ASEAN Economic Outlook this coming next year, 2022, we need to understand and evaluate. I want to major on one aspect so that other speakers can major on other aspects. It's an aspect on how do we understand ASEAN as a governance system, a community. How do we work together in ASEAN for recovery process? And the challenges that we have to face. So far, the issue of governance in ASEAN have to be looked at carefully. Thus far, we've done marvelously well for an organization that have been started over half a century ago. We have become a formidable force, a united force of some level of 10 nation countries, and we have created mechanism and structure and community linkage in a way that people look at us from outside in the entire globe, look at ASEAN as a bloc, as a community. The ASEAN community, therefore, has gained ground in recognition by others. Hence, that gives us an opportunity for economic outlook, because when they think of investing in any particular region of the world, ASEAN will always be in their inclusion of their thinking, whether they should invest in ASEAN. They should trade with ASEAN. Therefore, we have opportunity. But we have to really look carefully. Increasingly, over the timing, over the last many years, ASEAN increasingly become perceived as more or less almost like paper tiger. No real teeth to bite. It's just a tiger that's nice to look at, but not as effective as it should be. Therefore, for us to be able to move the economic outlook positively in this coming next year and other years to come, we need to turn ASEAN into more than a paper tiger. Why I say we are almost a paper tiger, because we come together on some kind of ASEAN way, which is some kind of principle behind ASEAN that prevent ASEAN to be able to work together easily. There are some benefits of believing in such premise, but also there is some disadvantage that come out from those premise. For example, the principle of non-interference is one example that make it so hard for ASEAN to go in to help other ASEAN countries to intervene somewhat so that we can make ASEAN integrity as a bloc can move forward together. When there was issues in domestic national border in one member of ASEAN, the rest of the 9 countries are helpless, binding by the principle so strongly adhered to of non-interference, which served its purpose for many years. Yes, without non-interference, ASEAN may not even come together. There's benefits, plus points that we cannot negate. But we also need to look carefully that come with the plus of non-interference is also the negative that make us helpless in solving problems that have affect ASEAN as a whole due to one country facing some problem, and we can't go in and interfere somewhat. Interfere, even positively, is not entertained. Apart from that, if the ASEAN member countries, some member countries are in conflicts or in some difficulties, in disagreement, it's really hard for the rest of the ASEAN countries to go in to assist because we cannot interfere. So in the past, ASEAN has to rely on outside people or nation state to interfere, in the sense to referee the difference and the difficulties facing by ASEAN countries in conflict. The principle of non-interference has to be looked at carefully, that how far can we doctor it so that we can change it a bit, we can tweak it a bit, so that we can really allow the non-interference principles to remain, but somewhat adjusted so that we can at least have mechanism to go in and help one another in a positive way. I think this is a real issue that we need to look at. The second issue is the principle of consensus. That means ASEAN would not move forward until the 10 countries in agreement, which is tough. When you have 2 people together, rarely that you agree all the time, let alone 10 countries together. To have consensus, that means you move at the lowest common denominators of your agreement. And therefore, very little thing can be done to move things forward until you get full consensus. And hence ASEAN almost helpless in able to manage anything in their internal problem within this bloc, because we need consensus. These are positive points because it helps weak, vulnerable member state not to be feeling like they will be pushed along by powerful blocs of the rest of ASEAN when they themselves are in disagreement due to some necessity. I agree totally with these 2 principles, but we need to change somewhat, and that's come with creativity. How far can we change this principle so that ASEAN become tiger with some teeth that can bite and can be effective? Another issue that we've seen is that when we are in COVID pandemic, ASEAN has very little role in helping one another and among ourselves, let alone helping other countries. This COVID crisis proved to us is a challenge, that ASEAN is not able to cope with the global crisis that hits our doorstep. COVID pandemic have revealed very little role of ASEAN community in handling COVID. We depend very much on the rotating chairman of ASEAN annually and the Secretary General with mandate of limitation. It's so tough when the organization of ASEAN have very small secretariat with little power. And then the chairman is rotating all the time, which I understand the diplomacy of allowing all countries to have a say to become chairman. Therefore, we need to look carefully. If we depend on the personality and the leadership of a particular chairman of a particular year, we may be sometimes disappointed because all personalities differ. The Vietnamese chairman may be fast, responsive. Maybe other countries may be more calmer, slower. Plus and negative points due to the personality and the leadership style of chairmanship have somewhat affect ASEAN annually, year by year, depends on who lead. We can see example during the Vietnamese time, when the Vietnamese want quick response to COVID and allow the health officers to work together to discuss, to debate, to dialogues, and using the China in ASEAN +3 to play some role. Therefore, if we have ASEAN chairmanship that are of different kind, we have to keep adjusting annually in rotating chairmanship. We have so many meetings in ASEAN, but I wonder how far can we gain grounds due to those meetings and those summits. Maybe we have to look in terms of other modus operandi and mechanism. We need to look at the funding issue, not only having some COVID ASEAN Response Fund. We also need to look at more than just ASEAN Regional Reserve of medical supplies. We need to look at many more things that ASEAN can do together to create structure and funding that allows it to happen. We need to let the data transfer and the information exchange to happen in the practicality, so that when we handle other issues in post-COVID and during COVID, we would be able to analyze the data quickly and assess the situation and propose things that make sense. ASEAN need to have not only the normal operation network, but we need crisis operation network. We need to look at network of many segments that we need to deal with, either education, health, technology, and many other things. We also need to look at risk management and risk communication so that we know how to handle risk in our grouping, and special mechanism where we can really fast speed tackling issues that come to pass. We need to look at the mechanism so that we can work together in concerted effort quickly in speedy time. The solution that come to offer for the challenges, I would suggest that we need to look at an HCE model of cooperation. Sometimes we need at the level of joint vision. Others will go further with joint mission, others further with joint action, further with joint outcome, and more with joint grouping and joint entity, and also with joint consummation as well as joint ideologue. The 8 models of cooperation and collaboration has to be looked at carefully. Which model are we using for ASEAN? And develop some construction that would allow engagement to be more constructive, creative, so that we would be able to handle the issue of the day properly. ASEAN need to work together with not only soft and hard power, but also integrate them together so that we have some teeth that can bite. ASEAN needs to get a lot more people, manpower already available to tackle issue, and funding of every kind needed. science, technology, innovation, infrastructure funding, development funding, cultural funding, educational funding, and so on. And we need to partner with not only state, but business and civil society. If we do that, possibly ASEAN will be able to work harder in solving problems together. Of course, we need to have early warning indicators so that we will be able to stop the problem at hand, and also particularly the issue of conflicts, so that ASEAN members have early warning that conflicts among us has to minimize. We need to find ways to fine-tune and work effectively in our management, which I call, we need to have manual operation. We have to checklist of what to do, template of what to do. And we need to have scheduling, which I call MCTS model that I create. Doing so properly, maybe ASEAN will be able to tackle 2022 in a better way. Let me conclude by saying that the job of ASEAN is far different from the European Union, and it's more challenging. We need to integrate together much more, work together much more, work harder together, work in a greater capacity together, not just living alone. And not only among ourselves, but engaging the other countries, the outside power, the great powers of the world. ASEAN need to be the glue that will make the whole world work together, and therefore we can be, by helping others, we're helping ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your insights. And I like the way that you present on the issues based on the G to G kind of perspective, from the government to government perspective. And because of that, we have a serious challenge in governance in ASEAN, especially when we deal about the non-interference policy as well as the consensus policy in ASEAN. So that is on the governance aspect. Dr. Patunru earlier on the economic aspect, Professor is on the governance aspect, and the discussion is really nice arranged because the next speaker, Jukhee, the Executive Director of CARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy, will speak on the society's aspect, from the perspective of the society, on how that we can actually embrace 2022 with the drivers and the challenges in the region. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jukhee to deliver her presentation. Over to you, Jukhee.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks to Idris. Also, thanks to Tricia, as well as Dr. Zokhri for this opportunity to share with you some of my observations with regards to the economic outlook for us in 2022, sharing from the business point of view, given my involvement in ASEAN business track within the ASEAN architecture. Now, for the first section is the economic outlook. I have to say that things are looking better now compared to when these projections I'm going to share with you were made. Now, according to the latest IMF World Economic Outlook report that was released in October this year, growth projections in 2022 have been downgraded as the momentum of global recovery has weakened at the time, while the uncertainty has increased due to the resurgence of the pandemic. Global economy is projected to grow at 5.9% this year and 4.9% in 2022, a small downgrade due to supply chain disruptions in advanced economies and worsening pandemic dynamics in low-income countries at the time of the report. Now, the emerging and developing Asia's growth projections was also downgraded to 6.3% due to slower than expected recovery caused by new COVID-19 variants. Now, zooming into Asia, now Asia's growth is projected to be at 5.7%, led by India, with the highest growth forecast at 8.9%, and China at 5.6%, and ASEAN at 5.5%. But taking a closer look at ASEAN in the next slide, now the growth rates vary considerably among ASEAN member states. ASEAN 5 countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam collectively have been projected to grow at 5.8%. Vietnam's economy is expected to be the fastest growing at 6.6%, and the Philippines at 6.3%, while Malaysia at 6%. Well, at the lower end, Brunei will see a 2.6% growth rate, and Myanmar will likely see a negative growth considering it is expected to experience a 17.9% of negative growth this year. Now, however, separately, the ADB also downgraded ASEAN's overall growth projections to 5% based on a report in September, with growth expected to be between 3.5 to 6.5% in 2022 among ASEAN member states. Again, Vietnam is projected to see the fastest growth momentum at 6.5%, although it is already a downgrade from the earlier projection of 7%. Now, for Malaysia, both the IMF and ADB projected Malaysia's growth at 6 and 6.1%. Malaysian government's projection is to be between 5.5 to 6.5% next year, while Malaysia's central bank, Bank Negara, said that the domestic economy is on track to expand by 3 to 4% due to increase in economic activities, as well as COVID-19 driven containment measures, which have been progressively relaxed. Now, it is important to note that the high projections are usually because of a low baseline, and meaningful comparison should be made based on absolute terms of output relative to pre-pandemic level in 2019, as opposed to 2020's baseline. Now, let's move to issues and challenges. Now, there are several issues that will continue to impact economic recovery, like other panelists have mentioned. Is related to COVID-19, and first and foremost, the most important being vaccine access. Now, the IMF has proposed a vaccination target of 40% of the population in all countries by the end of this year, and 70% by mid-2022. Now, this proposal has been endorsed by the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and the WTO. Now, however, according to the assessment conducted at the time, which was at the end of the third quarter of 2021, more than half of the countries in the world, accounting for about 35% of global population, were not on track to achieve the 40% mark by the end of this year, although I believe that the percentage would have increased by now. Now, fortunately in ASEAN, if you look at the red line, as of the 9th of December last week, the majority of ASEAN countries have surpassed that goal, with the exception of the Philippines and Myanmar, while Brunei and Singapore, as well as Cambodia, have the highest vaccination rates, between about 80 to 90%. With that being said, in fact, the COVID-19 situation has changed quite drastically since those projections were made, as the cases in ASEAN have largely come under control. Does it mean that the worst is finally over? Now, if we look at the chart that I'm sharing with you right now, this was as early as yesterday, except for Vietnam, which is still seeing about 14,000 cases. 3 ASEAN member states, Malaysia, Laos, and Thailand, are all at the low 4-digit range. You would see that Thailand is at the bottom, but there's some problem with the data, which I'm not sure why it's not showing. The cases yesterday were 3,787 based on the reports yesterday. And if you look at Singapore, Myanmar, Philippines, and Indonesia are recording low 3-digit cases, and Cambodia and Brunei are both having low 2-digit numbers. This suggests a better outlook if you were to look at the projections that came out, comparing it with the projection that came out about 2 months ago, reflecting how uncertain and the uncertain dynamics of the pandemic, and more so that we are talking about the Omicron variants and the rest. Now, as we know, although many of the AMS have already reopened their borders to some extent, one of the problems that adds to the complexity of economic recovery is the varying quarantine requirements and different testing protocols have not significantly repaired the damage on the tourism industry. Now, travel interests remain low. For example, Thailand, that requires no quarantine, I believe, after its opening, the opening of its border since November the 1st, only had just about 133,000 tourist arrivals. While in Indonesia, 6 weeks after the country has reopened, only 153 visa applications have been received in Bali. It seems that there's a long road ahead. Now, there is the other challenge which has been talked about, which is the global supply chain disruptions. Now, I just take a sample of the freight rates because the freight rates have spiked to an all-time high in 5 years average as shipping companies, logistics providers and ports struggled to keep up with the jump in trade volume. And this is also because of the COVID resurgence in parts of Asia earlier, threatening the supply of goods such as electronics, auto parts, commodities, and other goods, as you know. Now, based on the World Container Index, WCI by Drewry, that measures the bi-weekly ocean freight rate movements of 40-foot containers in 7 major maritime lanes connecting Shanghai and other ports, the composite index increased by 2.3% to about $9,300 per 40-foot container, which is 170% higher than the same week compared to last year. Now, the average composite index of the WCI this year is about $7,500 per 40-foot container, which is $4,745 higher than the 5-year average of the 2,739 per 40-foot container. Now, according to the shipping community, the good news is the worst of the global supply chain disruption is over, as the retailers have made pre-orders to ease the shortages of goods. Now, let's move on to the next challenge, which I have spent quite some time learning about. It's the climate change challenge. As we know that since the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC report came out this year in August, there were also other reports that show gaps that desperately need to be bridged. Now, one of which, according to the Climate Action Tracker, newly updated national determined contributions, NDCs, submitted so far in 2020 to 2021 have narrowed the gap closer to 1.5 degrees Celsius by only up to 15% or more precisely between 11 to 14% if you look at the chart on the left. But if the G20 economies that account for 75% of global GHG emissions set ambitious targets to reach net zero emissions by 2050, there's a chance that the global warming can be limited to 1.7 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, we'll be on a path to a 2.4 degrees Celsius, or some think there's a 2.7 degrees Celsius future. Now, moving on. Now, this slide shows the various shared socioeconomic pathway scenarios of global changes until the end of the century. There are a few scenarios, but according to projections, we require very low GHG emissions to keep the warming of the globe to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, if we act now in the form of climate mitigation and adaptation, especially in energy transitioning, we may still be able to turn back the tides. And to do that, we need a decisive 45% cut in GHG emissions by 2030 that is needed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, moving on, although most ASEAN countries are relatively small GHG emitters compared to the larger emitters or economies, now ASEAN energy-related GHG emissions are projected to be more than double by 2040. Now, ASEAN collectively emitted 5.6% greenhouse gases relative to the total global emissions. This is according to the statistics in 2018. If we look at the total GHG emissions, Indonesia has the highest emissions among ASEAN member states because of the size of the economy. It is ranked at the 7th in the world. But if we look at the carbon CO2 emission per capita, however, Indonesia's CO2 per capita emission is ranked way down, probably at 108 in the world and 6th in ASEAN. Whereas Brunei, which is the smallest economy among ASEAN member states, has the highest CO2 emissions per capita and actually ranked about the 5th spot in the world and highest in ASEAN. So the details, the devil is always in the details, yeah, and the nuance. Now, The single most crucial gap in achieving ASEAN's climate mitigation adaptation goals is financial assistance, and particularly the funding pledged by the developed countries to help the developing countries, especially when many of ASEAN's NDC's targets are dependent on the availability of climate finance. Now, on the eve of COP26 in Glasgow this year, the OECD estimated the total climate finance of the $100 billion pledged will not be reached until 2023. The irony is when we compare it with the fiscal recovery packages rolled out due to the pandemic by advanced economies, the contrast is staggering. Now, according to Oxfam International, in 2020, the EU, UK, US, Canada, Australia, and Japan combined have spent more than $15 trillion on COVID-19 fiscal recovery packages, which is about over 151 times of the needed climate finance goal of $100 billion. Not only that, total global military spending rose nearly 20 times more than the climate finance goal since 2019, reaching just below $2 trillion. Now, there's also a lot of numbers that came up from COP26, one of which is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero GFANZ that have committed 130 trillion of private capital for the next 3 decades to transition into low carbon economy. The question is always about the accessibility, whether vulnerable countries can access those funding. Now, also what's important is the clarity of incorporating critical aspects such as per capita emissions, climate equity, historical emissions, and carbon credit in the overall carbon emission evaluation in a structured manner, because it is imperative to prevent the pushback from developing countries, because it is a touchy subject among developing countries. And most importantly, an effective, inclusive and transparent climate diplomacy that engages both the global north countries and global south countries will be critical, so that we can avoid greenwashing and as well as green shaming, if I may, that may stand in the way for climate, in a way to climate resilience. And now let's look at the drivers and regional developments that will boost economic recovery, and we hope so as well. There are a few important regional chairmanships in ASEAN. Cambodia has taken over the chairmanship from Brunei, as you know, with the theme ASEAN ACT or ACT, addressing challenges together. In terms of the economic priorities, there is no particular surprise. I think it's probably still early stage. Cambodia will promote implementation of agreed initiatives and measures, physical and digital connectivity, strengthening the capacity of MSMEs, and promote entrepreneurship among women and youth. Now, for the political security pillar, however, Cambodia aims to strengthen ASEAN centrality, which is very important, and unity against the pressure and influence stemming from rising geopolitical competition. With regards to the ongoing Myanmar political crisis, all eyes will be on Prime Minister Hun Sen, who will engage directly with the Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, because he's planned to visit in January to Naypyidaw. And there also seems to be a softer tone by Prime Minister Hun Sen since the ASEAN summit in October, that Myanmar was excluded. Now, on turning to Indonesia, Indonesia has assumed the G20 presidency with a theme of Recover Together, Recover Stronger, and that covers 5 pillars under the presidency: enabling environment and partnership, promoting productivity, increasing resilience and stability, ensuring sustainable inclusive growth, and stronger collective global leadership. And there's a long list of financial priorities as well, including sustainable finance. Now, as for Thailand, Thailand is the chair for APEC 2022, and the theme for APEC 2022 is Open, Connect, and Balance, while embracing the bio-circular green economy, BCG, as the overarching thinking. And here, let's pause a little bit and think of ASEAN integration from the business point of view. We are 4 years away from the completion of the second ASEAN community blueprint, unfortunately, I have to say that I think regional connectivity remains fragmented when the 5 characteristics of ASEAN economic community of free flow of goods, services, investment, capital, and skilled labor are concerned. There has not been any groundbreaking leap in terms of moving towards single market and production base. NTB issues remain unresolved, and other trade facilitation issues are still unresolved. And finally, let's look to something more encouraging. It's of course the biggest driver for ASEAN in 2022 would of course be the entry into force of RCEP, scheduled to on the 1st of January in just about 2 weeks' time. There will be, there are still 4 AMS, I believe Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Philippines that have not completed ratification process. Nevertheless, RCEP will bring the necessary economic boost to the region in terms of regional economy with a gradual removal of tariffs in the next 20 years. Now, another closely related development in ASEAN is the ASEAN and China relations. They have recently agreed to upgrade bilateral relations to ASEAN-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, as both sides celebrated the 30th anniversary of establishment of ASEAN-China dialogue relations. Now, both China and ASEAN are the largest trade partners of each other since 2020. And at the recent summit, China has made multiple pledges. China will provide 1.5 billion US dollars of development assistance to ASEAN to fight against COVID-19 and economic recovery. And China will donate an additional 150 million doses of COVID vaccines to ASEAN. China will contribute an additional 5 million US dollars to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund, and also to import up to 150 billion worth of agricultural products from ASEAN in the next 5 years. Now, it's important to note that against these backdrops, we also observed the renewed interest of the US government in engaging ASEAN, although most of the interest in the region has been more political in nature and to a lesser extent in economic cooperation. But that is changing. Now, as we speak, I believe the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting the region, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And the message that we're getting is that the US President Joe Biden is committed to elevating US engagement with ASEAN to unprecedented levels. And it is said that this visit is aimed at strengthening economic ties. Now, we will observe this rebalancing and hope that ASEAN centrality is preserved in the new race to achieve regional influence between China and US, especially in view of ASEAN increasingly become a battlefield for influence. Now, lastly, if I may end, I think the key for ASEAN, at least in the nearest term, is to tackle COVID-19 on an ongoing basis because of the very fluid dynamics of the pandemic. And we need to leverage on regional infrastructure than to operate individually. And hence, regional integration needs to be deepened. Whereas for the medium term, that is to put in place inclusive climate policies and to continue to insist on ASEAN centrality for regional stability. And for that, I call for better public-private partnership to advance integration effort. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Jukhee, for the facts and data, as well as for the presentation from the business perspective as what we are predicting in 2022 and ahead. Now, we are going on to the reflection and discussion session in which I will be reflecting onto the points of all our speakers, and then we'll go on to the Q&A to all of our viewers out there. If you do have any questions to the speakers, please do so in the chat box. I've been receiving some questions for the viewers, and I'll try my very best to also marry these questions that I have received with the discussions today. Now, I think for both Jukhee and Arianto, both of you have projected on the growth in 2022, and especially in Jukhee's presentations, that we will see a decline from the 5.9 till 4.9 in the global growth of economic outlook in 2022. And you're also mentioning it's because of the global supply chain that is recovering, but it's not up to the optimum. And I think Arianto also said the same thing, that the global supply chain is recovering, although that it's not at the optimum level. Now, I mean, as a layman understanding, if we are seeing that the economic outlook is actually declining, I mean, projected to be declining in 2022, now, how can we even be convinced that this is actually something normal and should not be panicked? And what actually that we can actually do to make it more neutral in a sense, so that everyone is looking forward to expect what's going to happen to 2022. So I probably will start with Jukhee, and then I'll pass the floor to Arianto on this question.
Thank you very much for the question. I think, as I said, you know, when the predictions were made or projections were made, it was in October. And now that it is just about 2 months away or 1.5 months away, after that, the dynamics of the pandemic has already changed. If you look at that time, if you see the graph, it's already a deep a drop, yeah, very drastically. Now, there is no reason, I think we shouldn't panic because I think, I'm not an economist, I have to qualify that those projections were made by the IMF, yeah, and also there were a bunch of other predictions or projections by various institutions. Even though that it is a downgrade, it is still a fairly robust growth, but because also that the baseline of 2020 was really low, and therefore the jump is a bit more drastic. And because of the uncertainty of how this virus will develop, the pandemic will develop, I think it is good for us to stay calm and really take it on a rolling basis or month-to-month basis. But I think recovery is definitely on the way. It's just that the degree that we have to probably moderate, depending on whether or not new variants is going to stop our region from opening. It is going to take a long time, as you know, that even as you know, tourism is a huge contributor to regional GDP, and yet, you know, it's taking such a slow restart. So I think it is something that we will only be able to observe as the pandemic develops. Yeah, I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Arianto, is there any additional points?
Yes, thank you. Even though I'm an economist, I'm in the principle of health first, economy second, right? But of course, at some point, they will have to move together, co-move. And I think as Professor Kriengsak also mentioned, at some point we have to learn to live with this virus, right? So I agree with other panelists that we still need to be very vigilant in terms of dealing with this virus, but at the same time, we need to start, you know, gradually increase the economic fundamentals and things like that, and if possible, collaborate with one another. So when they move together, we are ready for anything you want to call it, new normal or whatever. But you know, some economic activities in collaboration will involve things like travel bubble, for example, right? How to actually, you know, cooperate between adjacent countries in the region to start, you know, revitalize the tourism. And then in terms of global supply chains, I think we have to put priority, and the very top on the priority is to ensure that food supply chain is, you know, not hindered, because that's the most important one. And then we move gradually towards other big issue, for example, in RCEP. I really hope that these remaining 3 countries will ratify this month, so we can really start January next year.
Okay, so yes, though the alarm is there, but it's not something to be panicked because we have some drivers, and what we can do is just to hope for these drivers to work on. Right, brilliant. Now, I'm going to our second speaker, Kriengsak. Now, you stated all of these problems and issues within the region, and I think the issue of the non-interference and consensus has been happening for so long. It's not even a year or 2 years, but it's been even for decades. But my question is, now, given the pandemic that has been incepting the region for 2 years, and we've seen how it adversely impacting the global supply chain, is this not enough to create a shock to ASEAN as a governance entity to do something about it, to go out of the box and to be more creative and to revise what needs to be revised, because the shock is here, it's imminent. But how is this not enough for ASEAN to change its governance mindset? Over to you, Kriengsak. I'm afraid you're on mute. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm an economist, but because you tell me to talk on governance, therefore I refrain from the issue and allow my colleagues to deal with it, which I concur with them all. But I'm tempted to add a little bit on that and tie in with the issue of ASEAN you asked me, if you don't mind. One is that I really think that the whole ASEAN bloc is an open economy, and we are affected heavily by external economy. That means we depend heavily, for example, on exporting, and we depend heavily on tourism. And because of the pandemic has disrupted the entire world in terms of linkage, including supply chain. Therefore, we are severely affected by it, no doubt. And before we recover, others in the world has to recover in other regions. And therefore, we are going to be in trouble for a long time. The prospect of growth that we've seen this coming year is how we compare to last year. But we have declined heavily post-COVID. Before COVID time, we were at one stage, we come down. Before we go back to pre-COVID situation, it will take a long time. And therefore, my ideas would be, this should shake us badly to think that, hey, as a bloc, we need to work together much more in integrative approach economically. That means we should have our regional supply chain inside our ASEAN bloc as a subset of the supply chain, global supply chain. Why? Because as a community, we are far more cohesive than other grouping. Hence, let's put our effort together, shake our leadership around the whole ASEAN 10 countries and say it's time to really work together, at least using this crisis of COVID to make us realize that we can't be what I call almost a paper tiger. We must work together. We must intervene constructively. May I use the word of my my friend, the late Surin Pitsawan. He's my close friend, the Secretary General of ASEAN, who used the word constructive engagement. Therefore, he was attempting a bit tongue-in-cheek to try to pursue ASEAN to work together more, but there were no concrete outcome till this day. May we say this? It's a blessing in disguise when we have COVID. It shakes us to realize as a bloc we can be a formidable force. We are a growing region of the world pre-COVID. Why don't we work together on the first basis economically? And that will be conducively move us on to socio-political governance issue later, which is harder. Let's get on with the economic issue so that we, for the betterment of among ourselves. That means we need to really not compete too heavily, but be more comparative advantage in our approach, in our 10 ASEAN nation. Allow the market to dictate who are good in what, and we would not just be too competitive among ourselves. As an integrated region, allow ourselves to measure on what matters for us, and then the rest of our friends in ASEAN measure on what is good for them. I think this is the opportunity. If we start doing that, eventually the light will dawn on leadership and say, hey, we need to start so-called working, intervening each other inside. And then we start talking on the issue I mentioned. Hey, governance system is not okay. You either continue to be paper tiger, then the whole world realize eventually that you are not a tiger, you are a paper tiger. Or we get to move on and make the tiger really able to have some teeth. And I believe this is an opportune moment, but how do I assess that? We lost that moment the last almost 2 years. None of the leadership of ASEAN, if I dare say without having to be too impolite, none of the leadership of ASEAN rise up to the occasion and shake up the rest of ASEAN and say, hey, let's get together. Let's discuss the real issue that we need to go forward in the future. I am disappointed, to be honest. I'm not going to try to cruise along and congratulate ASEAN without provoking. If this session have any meanings, we need to provoke them and say, hey, let's get on. We cannot remain stagnant the way we are. We are creating a promise to the world that is not going to be truly realized unless we change. I believe we must find constructive way, creative way to find avenue to remain in our ASEAN principle without continue the same old way. The signs are showing everywhere. Myanmar issue, right. Other issues are coming. Why don't we do something? That's my opinion.
Exactly. The points are well noted, and it's taken because the problem of the G2G is because of political will and because all of these leaders are actually shaping how ASEAN works. And we really agree as well that the society needs to do a bottoms-up approach in putting pressure and advocacy. So all these political leaders will listen. And I think I really want to ask this to Jukhee, and I think coincidentally, Jukhee also raised a question. Now, Jukhee, you are the Executive Director of CARI, ASEAN Research and Advocacy. The word advocacy means a lot. So given the problems that we have in ASEAN, that the business community really wants to be together, the economy wants to be together, Kriengsak says that the community wants to be cohesive, but what can we do to advocate this matter further? Any strategy perhaps that we can think together as a region, from Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, all of these 10 countries in ASEAN to think of a strategy to advocate to this governance in an ASEAN for the betterment in the future, as well as you have something to say, I suppose. I'll give this opportunity to you. Over to you, Jukhee.
Thank you very much. I really wanted to share my frustration as Dr. Kriengsak was talking about the missed opportunity of COVID-19. At the height of the pandemic in 2020, through the ASEAN Business Advisory Council channel, all the businesses across ASEAN have put together a report called the Pathway to 2.5 with 255 proposals. These are very high-level aspirations that businesses have seen during the course of the pandemic. This was developed mid of last year, and it was rushed out in just about 1 or 2 months with the purpose of hoping to fast track this advocacy that the institution of ASEAN itself would respond to us. And also as a proposal to how to bring those 255 proposals to life, it's been proposed to have a high-level task force that would involve the private sector. And what do you think the outcome has been? I'm sure that you would have guessed it right, nothing, because the ASEAN institution has said we had multiple engagements with the ministers, with the leaders that gave us a varying degree of support and cautious responses. Yeah, and some of them, and I think the consensus at the end that came out from that is that they prefer to leverage existing infrastructure than to reinvent the wheel of some sort. Now, however, if you look at the architecture itself, the whole COVID-19 response that is being coordinated within the ASEAN system or infrastructure or architecture is actually led by the foreign affairs ministries. And you know that all these business-related COVID-19 problems are all, they all originate from the economic pillar of community. And that already itself has a gap or a missing link. And since then, after multiple engagements and consultations we've had with them, we realized that there's no point to pursue that further in terms of the form or channel. Let's at least get the issues across. And we have been, through multiple requests and multiple submissions of letters, to be invited. We, as in the private sector, wanted to be invited to those meetings convened by the political security pillar, or the committee that actually handles the coordinating matters is actually called ACC WGPHE, which means the ASEAN Consultative Committee of the Working Group on Public Health Emergencies. Yeah, it's a ACC WGPHE. Now, this is 2 years already. And if you look at the chart that I screenshot, this is as late as last night. We are looking at I was totally surprised that Indonesia is looking at about a low 300 or 3 digits kind of cases a day, given that the population is the biggest. And we are coming, I'm a bit more hopeful because of the numbers. If Omicron can be contained, it's not that deadly. Now, if you look at this, is like I hope that we are slightly coming out, although not a recovery, post-pandemic situation, but it's under control. Now, then we are totally missed that, precious 2 years to push for a change. If a COVID-19 crisis cannot change, what would? With hundreds of thousands of people dying, then what would? Have we wasted a crisis? Yeah, I have to say that, of course, when we interacted with ASEAN Secretariat, the colleagues there, they have tried their best. I'm not here to say that they are not doing their job. They are within whatever policies, or structure, political structure, whatever mandate that have been given. But it is, after all, a secretariat. Their job is to coordinate meetings and not to execute, unlike the European Commission. And these are entrenched problems that if you want to change, we have to change the whole institution, the structure, the construct of it. And I think that, as I learned over the years interacting with ASEAN, the very reason it is not the way that we hope it is to be, it's because there's no intention to make it as powerful as the European Commission. It is a secretariat. So we need to then examine, we have to take a step back and say that what is the outcome that we want? And then we have to take, work backwards. And I think the key question is, what is the outcome that we want? Now, then, to answer your question about then, what can we do then? What strategy? Let's be realistic about this. The policy advocacy is something that we must pursue, but businesses, economic activities cannot be conducted in the absence of having any progress in that channel, because business don't wait. And then, we need to make the economic activities move so that, we feed, households, we have economic growth and etc. So then the best way I would suggest is that a lot of times when we talk to policymakers, they would say, policymakers would respond if there is a real demand. Then they will come around and provide the policy environment to make it happen. And if there's critical mass of business demand, then we will make them, as in the policymakers, to turn around and say, let's do something about it. I give an example. Digitalization. Because of the pandemic, there is this uptake of adoption, which is huge numbers and all that. And you would see that in this year's chairman's statement, they have already have a various framework and all that, because there is real demand of moving the digital economy, and therefore that's prioritized. Of course, we would talk about climate change and whatnot later on. So I would say the strategy is making sure that we all have the kind of critical mass. And I like to cite another example. In the year 2019, when Thailand was the chair of ASEAN, I had the opportunity to interact or engage with the ASEAN finance ministers and central bank governors. And at that time also we presented what the private sector thought was important to the financial sector or financial integration. And I remember vividly the central bank governor of Thailand has asked the private sector to try to promote this mechanism that they have put together, which is the bilateral arrangement for currency settlement. It took them a lot of effort to put this together, and it is on a bilateral basis. They have to do this with multiple countries, and yet the take-up was not great. So that means to say to me, it proves that they would move if the demand is there. So I hope that that gives you, is a way to share with you the frustration that we've experienced in real advocacy work when we talk to the government or the leaders. I think their intention is always there, but of course we are ultimately 10 different countries. We all have different, we all have the same kind of I wouldn't say comparative advantages, because we're all fighting for the same FDIs. We're all more or less manufacturing oriented. And therefore, it is really hard at this point because we are not integrated. I agree. We are pointing, we're giving a vision that is not going to be achieved. The single market production base, it is not the way it is for the European, the EU. We are going to be more cooperative among ourselves, less of integrated among ourselves. And I think that expectation needs to be set among us or aligned. Thank you. I took too much time.
No worries, no worries. I mean, it gives us more opportunity to understand the frustrations of the work that you do, the experience as well as the institute, and so also to echo with Dr. Kringsak's frustration. I am not sure actually whether Arianto shares the same frustrations, or is there any positivity that perhaps can come from this forum today. But again, I think ASEAN has been there for a very long time, and it's not only that it's no longer young, but it seems there is no any major change happening after the fault lines has been happening in the world, and something that needs to be done. I think Jukhee and Dr. Kriengsak, I think one of the takeaway points that we probably can establish from this forum, though it's quite early to say that because it's not even ended, I think we need to find ways to have a regional advocacy strategy, inter-organizations and inter-countries based organizations, so that we can find ways to amplify further our voices as well as our frustrations to the existing governance in the system. I would like to ask this to Dr. Kriengsak later on, how more creative that we should be from the existing framework, because you said in your presentations that you got to be creative. Like, what else that we have to be and to do in order to be more creative, given the fact that all of this poor acceptance from these political leaders? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy to be opening up the frustration Pandora box, and now Jukhee is feeling this same thing, the outburst of the same feeling that she had been containing before. And I think our friend from Indonesia will probably, Arianto, will say the same thing. So we have to have another push forward at this juncture. Before the COVID totally died down, this is our last severe opportunity. Last severe opportunity. In my opinion, I think this last almost 80 years of the world, we never seen as something economically as severe as we found today. If this does not break shake up the ASEAN leadership, nothing will. And this is our last opportunity. I have a feeling that we have to live with COVID, and this coming 2022 will be our finality or opportunity. Finality opportunity. Therefore, the leadership, the 10 countries needs to be accountable to our people and say, hey, we don't want you to warm the seats. Creatively come together. How? The question is very important. Somebody have to take the lead. And let me be very bold and put it this way, if you don't mind. Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, get together. The four of you sit down, work out some framework of pushing forward ASEAN so that the four key economies work together and say, here, this is a proposal to the rest of ASEAN. It's not an elite club of ASEAN of 4 countries, for example. It's 4 countries that have some major say due to the size of the economy and so on. And let's propose something concrete and say, hey, we got to change. We got to change. This is what we want. So the 4 get together. Why don't I call my prime minister and you call Lee Hsien Loong? Somebody call somebody. I was in politics and I knew all these guys. Therefore, I say, you have to be more personal. You cannot be so formal. Creative way is that come and play golf with me. I'm going to talk to the 4 of you and say, let's discuss. Jukhee, Prayut, Lee Hsien Loong, and whoever could be the Prime Minister of Malaysia coming, and then come together and let's talk. And if you never get things done formally at the big summit and all the big table and all the foreign affairs ministries, nothing gonna work. It's the leadership, the little leadership, dedicated leadership. Can we revisit ASEAN? 60 years roughly ago, we convened ASEAN. The late Arndt-Corden, my deputy prime minister at that time, foreign minister, which I know very well because I was his young friend. He was much older than me. He has a vision together with the founder of ASEAN. But today, shall we have another refounding of ASEAN? Get it done. This is your last chance. Tell you, Q1 2022, get it done. Can someone do it? Otherwise, all this talk shop that we have, get nothing done if we have no action from this leader, because they contain the power. They have the power. And would they do it? Unless the people provoke and say, we're not going to elect you unless you do something, because the whole destiny of our countries depend on gluing together ASEAN in the integrated manner. We have served the purpose for a paper tiger thus far. Now, let's get on. This is a very strong word, which is, I don't know if it's proper or not. It may get you into trouble ideas, but I tell you, this is a frustration. Nothing done today, nothing will ever be done for the next 50 years if nothing happens this coming next quarter.
IDIS is an independent think tank, so we welcome all sorts of views, all levels of opinion. No worries, IDIS will be fine. And I think to make me not to just having this as a talk shop, I think I probably will consider playing golf or learning how to play golf next year. I probably will find Jukhee for that, so that we can go for the lessons together. Now, there is one question from our audience, and it's by Giant Menon. Our senior fellow from ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And I think I would like to pass these questions to Arianto. It says that travel bans have never worked, not with the original or new variants. As each day brings new Omicron being discovered in new countries, they are not working now either. Wouldn't ASEAN be better off focusing on improving domestic surveillance rather than closing the borders? Wouldn't the lost output from weakening recoveries from border closure justify such a change in focus? So yeah, that's a battle between closing borders or not. What should we do internally? Arianto, if you have any views on this.
Well, thank you. I think, well, I agree with Jay. I think when I say we should support travel bubble, it's the way to completely opening up the borders, right? But we need to do it gradually, while at the same time instituting a good surveillance, as he mentioned there, domestic surveillance, right? So we need to support travel bubbles initiative, and then from there, grow the bubble gradually to include more and more participants until we can actually opening up, like, pre-pandemic year. So I think I agree with that. Closing the border completely will not work. And as I mentioned, at some point, this will move together, health and economics, because at the end of the day, they're always, cross affect each other, right? Or in economics term, they're endogenous. So we need to be able to live with the COVID, but at the same time, we practice health, protocols and things like that. And I think it will stay with us for a long time.
Thank you. Again, coming back to the progress of ASEAN as a region, I think there is a growing call that, in fact, foreign policy in ASEAN should be perceived in a different way. Because the existing status quo does not work. In fact, with few of the crises happen, it still remains the same. And I think Jukhee also mentions that the ASEAN Secretariat, though they know what needs to be done because they are just a secretariat, I think the main stakeholders actually lies on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in each country, and also depending on the political will of the Prime Minister as well as the Ministers of Foreign Affairs. So I think from what I'm taking from these discussions today, the forum today, is that all of these key drivers, challenges, and possibilities remain as it is if things do not change politically. I don't know, we might face the same discussion and the same questions again next year at the end of 2022 if the political will remains the same. And I think it's just going to round and back. So I think what needs to be done is to actually foster a stronger alliance from the bottoms up approach. I think ideas will be engaging with CARI to learn more about this 255 proposals. Also, we'll be engaging with the Institute of Future Studies for Development and the NBI, so that I think following Dr. Kringsak's suggestions that these four countries or these four economies should actually step forward in putting more voices to the demands of the people, and then perhaps follow up by other economies or other countries. So that would be my takeaway as the moderator today. And in the interest of time, we've got 6 minutes left to 12 noon, and we've answered all questions. And as a bonus, we have listened to the frustrations or the confessions of 2021. I would like to give the floor to all speakers just to have their concluding remarks, any last words for our viewers, for all of our friends out there. What would be the takeaway for the forum today? I will start in, if previously we will start with Arianto, Kriengsak, and Jukhee. Let's go the other way around. I'll start from Jukhee, Kriengsak, and then to Arianto. Jukhee, if you may just take the floor for a few minutes.
Yeah, okay. I'm still thinking about what would be the best few points I can share, because there are plenty. Yeah, I think just to kind of like bring it back together from the frustration that I mentioned. Practically, if we really want to move the needle, as we know how ASEAN works, the chair of the year has a lot of say. And I really want things to happen like now, or within the next 1 year. The best party to engage is actually the Cambodian government. And I have to clarify that even though that within the ministerial coordination is actually led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it is the leaders, at the top level that actually is the highest level of accountability. So the best practical way is for us to interact or engage with the Cambodian leadership, so that this kind of messaging can be embedded. However, this is not new, right? We all know that there were voices, there were frustrations, and especially during the course of COVID-19. I give you another example, if I may. When we, I think this was some time ago, when we invited the minister at the time. He was the Minister of Science, Mosti in Malaysia, but now he's the Minister of Health. I remember during the webinar, I mentioned to him, because he was coordinating the vaccine purchases, you know, and all that. And then I asked him whether he knew about the ACC WGPHE. He said he never heard of it. He never knew that that thing existed. So the fragmentation is not only at the ASEAN level. Within the national levels, there are multiple types of fragmentation. Yeah. So, but the best way and the most, I would say, if I may suggest, to really bring this forward, is to really engage with the current chair or the new chair of ASEAN, which is Cambodia. Now, having said that, the other party, of course, we need to go back to the ASEAN Secretariat, which is usually swarmed with too many meetings. Now, to whether or not we can really, which I think we must, to have a conversation to rethink, we should always do that, even for a country, a company, or ASEAN, is to really have, like, you know, a more informal way of engaging with each other. But given COVID, they cannot meet and play golf. And if they do, it is not good for press, right? So it's probably something we have to think about. What are the practical ways of getting them together, which we know they can, given a very important situation like this year rather, it felt so long ago, because of the crisis in Myanmar. They actually had a meeting in Jakarta, convened in Jakarta with the Bruneian chair, the Royal Highness of Brunei, there. So Sultan of Brunei. So what I mean is, if the demand, the motivation, the will is strong, they will move. However, most practical way, engage with the Cambodian government. And I think Dr. Kriengsak can take the lead, because I know he's very passionate about this. And Chari will try to, you know, collaborate or support where we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jukhee. Dr. Kriengsak?
Yes, three things. Let me say quickly, very brief words. Number one, the remaining quarter of 2022, let's treat ASEAN pretend it's a single community. That means we synchronize our COVID policy together. Make sure that we synchronize our policy together. Can we pretend and sit down and do it and open up our border among ASEAN by synchronize our policy together and say, we got to tackle it together, not each country on their own. And let's see whether it will work. Since COVID become a positive blessing in provoking us to do something together, let's try with this policy synchronization of COVID for the remaining time that is the remnant of time that we have, which I think this is our last chance to work together. That's number one. Pretend we work together. Pretend we have a single policy. Pretend we have one border. Pretend we allow it to move up and down together as a body. That's number one, very concrete. Can they do it? They have the political will. Number two, bottom-up approach. Nation Building Institute Thailand has helped foster Nation Building Institute Malaysia at the invitation of Malaysia, and we have done so. Can we do bottom-up approach through our mechanism, like Jukhee is saying? Let's create a bottom-up approach everywhere bottom-up, so that we pressure the political power to do something, because without the people moving from the bottom-up in a constructive way, not protesting, but a massive understanding of people bottom up in civil society, so that the government feel the heat and say, hey, the people are wanting a better ASEAN, a more integrated ASEAN. We're going to work together. Can I invite Arianto, Jukhee, and others who are listening, come and join together, work the bottom-up approach. Nation Building Institute have created a huge global network. We just had in September, 2,000 people attending our conference, online and offline, 50 countries in participation on issue of COVID. Let's work together instead of just do it bit by bit, everybody. Bottom up integrated together civil society-wise. On the societal sector first, even the government are not willing. Let the societal sector do it. Number two, my last issue is external power. Be honest. ASEAN is a place, the contending powers, the two, can I name it? USA and China. They are competing in our backyard in ASEAN. And that break up ASEAN. Today, ASEAN are pro-US, leaning towards US in some groups, some countries, some a little bit pro-China. Come on. We got to make sure China and USA uphold the integrity and integrativeness of ASEAN, not splitting us up. If I'm this candid, I hope US and China, you're listening to me. Come on, let's not let ASEAN be a playground of superpowers. Come on, work together and make ASEAN an integrated body that is useful for ASEAN and for you and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really, really moving. Arianto, on your last.
Thank you. I just very briefly, I agree with this notion of not letting a crisis go to waste or its variants, build back better, recover stronger on all that. But I think it's also important not to fix something that is not broken, right? And that something is flexibility. I think ASEAN has this flexibility, other groups don't have as much. And flexibility is, I think, is essential for resilience, to build resilience, because just strengthening something further and further might actually make it break when the wind comes, right? So I think we need to get a good balance there. Collaboration, of course, is very important, and things like, for example, ASEAN has not been progressive enough on collaboration on food security, right? While as I said earlier, ensuring that food supply is warranted is key in this COVID time, and things like that. And actually, RCEP is good in that sense also, because as Dr. Kriengsak said earlier, it started with the lowest common denominator, right? And that's why RCEP is I think is a good arrangement compared even to CPTPP, for example. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you to all speakers, to all of our viewers. I think that we've hit to the right discussion and the angle. We analyzed the problem in 2020 as well as in 2021. We know what needs to be fixed. All is done is that whether we really want to fix this. And again, the forum exposes on the bottoms-up approach opportunities for us as a civil societies and the civilians and the family of ASEAN to actually bring the torch and move further. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, allow me to officially express our vote of thanks to all of our speakers. We have Professor Dr. Kriengsak Chareonwongsak, the President of the Institute of Future Studies for Development and the Chairman of the NBI, Nation Building Institute. We also have Dr. Arianto Patunru, a fellow at the Arndt-Corden Department of Economics, ANU, specializing in Indonesia project, as well as Ms. Jukhee, the Executive Director of CARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy, Malaysia. The forum today, with the title Analyzing the Recovery Issues and Key Challenges, is in conjunction with the ASEAN Prosperity Initiative website, which we have launched today by the name of ASEANprosperity.org. In the website that we have showcased all of the events, reports, webinars, and write-ups, every single thing to analyze what we can do as a region in the years to come. And also, secondly, ladies and gentlemen, IDEAS has successfully launched the ASEAN Integration Report 2021, which is launched there, and it is already available in our website for the soft copies. that talks about various issues regarding ASEAN prosperity projects in terms of energy, food security, business prospects, as well as all this kind of governance. That's all been contributed by all of our respective authors. I would like to mention these authors for everyone's information. We have Yeo Bee Yin from Malaysia. YB Yeo is formerly a minister in the parliament, as well as a member of the government of Malaysia. We also have the researchers from our partners, CHIPS, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, by the name of Philippa and Amananta and Ms. Rina Nurani Nafisa. We have Dr. Jayan Menon from ASEA's Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Dr. Menon also joined and asked questions earlier on, thank you, as well as Ms. Hang Jukhee from the CARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy. So these are very good findings and very good reports. Please have a look at this report. We welcome any feedback onto this report so that we can always improve and explore newer areas in the research of ASEAN prosperity. And we look forward for 2022 for a more rigorous research and advocacy. Certainly, Dr. Kriengsak and Hang Jukhee has laid out the points of advocacy. What can ideas explore in 2022 when it comes to prosperity in ASEAN? And we look forward for all of your support in this kind of process. Once again, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay pleasant, stay positive. Have a really good Merry Christmas and 2022 year ahead from Ideas Malaysia to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good to learn from all of you. Thank
Jukhee,
you.
thank you.
Thank
Keep in
you.
touch.
Tricia, thank you.
Thank you all. Just a note to thank, especially all of you for being here, but Prof. Kringsak's very, very passionate plea is something that I will take with me. And yeah, I think as